Great to see everybody here for the lecture series for the PAN convention, fall convention. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to introduce Don Everhart to all of you. Don is the retired lead engraver of the United States Mint. He's engraved many of the coins and commemoratives and congressional gold medals that you're going to see today. It's really been outstanding history. If you were at the banquet last night, you got a little bit of a flavor of what you're going to hear today. But Don has been a true friend to numismatics. He's been a true friend to PAN over the years, and a true friend. How about that?
I like that.
And I have another surprise. I was on the floor, and I found these just now. And one of the ones that you're going to see today is probably the March of Dimes, maybe.
Yes, it's
in there, and the Lions Club. So these three I'm going to donate to the PAN auction. Don's going to autograph them after the presentation, and they'll be available over there to the highest bidder. So I know that you're really proud of particularly the March of Dimes. So without further ado, please welcome Don Everhart.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Because I was pretty quiet last night, but anyway, I'll get started. So, little bit of background. When I left high school, I had no idea what I was going to do. But like I said last night, I had better grades in art and spelling, but you know, not a lot of careers in spelling, so I went with art. And there was no plan B. You know, it's like you got to do this and get it right the first time because that's the way it's going to be. So I kicked around for a couple months after I left school, and I wound up in this ticket and label company in northeast Philadelphia, and I was doing mechanicals. Back in those days, we did them by hand on, you know, a piece of board, and you had to paste the type on. Now we do it with computers, so that's obsolete. So I worked there for about a year, but during lunch and my breaks, I would go visit. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I decided one day that I was going to have a one-man show, so I went down to South Street in Philadelphia with my portfolio, my student portfolio, and I went into the first gallery that I saw, and I ran into a person called DEBAKEY who owned the gallery. And she said, well, we don't have any slots here now, but we have a job opening where I work out in Lima, Pennsylvania. And I said, what is it? She said, pay stub. I was like, okay, how much does it pay? So it was $1,000 more than what I was making at the ticket and label company a year. So that was a lot of money for me, and it got me out of the city. So that was the Franklin Mint. I went to the Franklin Mint. I worked there for a year in the paste up department. Again, doing paste up, which was boring as hell for me. I hated it. And I thought I needed to get a job in illustration doing album covers, which is what I really wanted to do. So I took my student portfolio down to South Street. I met with Rita, and she told me that there was, you know, this job out in Lima where Franklin Mint was. So I started out there. After, during my lunch breaks and you know, just when I would take a break, I would go visit the other sculptors. Believe it or not, there were 38 sculptors at the Franklin Mint at one point. But I would see what they were working on, and it really intrigued me. So I thought, you know, before I leave, I got a foot in the door. I might as well give it a shot. So I did a couple tryout pieces, and they hired me on the third one. So I worked for the next 5 years in the engraving sculpting department at the Franklin Mint. And that's where I like to say I got my master's degree, because that's where I really learned how to do this. Mostly because of the volume I was doing, which was between 50 and 60 sculpts a year. So I worked there for 5 years. I did a lot of coin of the realm for other countries, and a lot of just about every program that I worked on while I was there that the Mint was producing. But again, the old voice in my head said, you know, this isn't really what you want to do. Don't you want to work at home? I was like, yeah, I want to work at home. I want to just, you know, have a studio and freelance. So I left in March of 1980, and I worked at home for the next 24 years. And I did coins, medals, I did toys, I did giftware, I did life-size bronze sculptures. I can't even remember everything. I worked for Disney. I did Disney figures. So I did that for 24 years, and around the early part of the 2000s, the work started to slow down, because a lot of the giftware companies, it was my major clients at the time, said they were sending their work to the Orient. So it just so happened I've always been lucky in my career, and somebody from the U.S. Mint called me and said, hey, there's going to be a job opening. So long story short, a year later, I walk into the United States Mint, hating every minute of it because it was an hour commute each way at least. I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning. You know, I was used to rolling out of bed and being in my studio. So that was a big shock. But after I was there for a month or so, I was like, this is really cool. You know, when I was freelancing, I would do a job occasionally that was important. But I felt every job I did for the United States Mint was important because it was, and a lot of people were going to see it. So let me just walk you through some of these photos I have here. So that guy there is going to walk you through this. This is actually a portrait of Lincoln that I did at the U.S. Mint. It was part of the presidential series. And I was doing this design for the portrait of Lincoln on paper, and it just wasn't working for me. I couldn't get it to look like him, and it just didn't have a feel for it. So at the time, a lot of people were working on these tablets. It's actually a computer screen, and you can draw right on the screen. It's called a WACOM. So I thought, what the hell, I'll give it a shot. So I started doing this portrait of Lincoln, and it was coming out great. I loved it, and it actually got chosen. So if you do a design and you get it chosen, you get to sculpt it. So that's the way it works at the Mint. So that's what I was doing here, and that's the tablet. That I'm working on the reverse of the Constantino Brumidi Congressional Gold Medal. And if you're ever in the rotunda at the U.S. Capitol and you look up, that's what you will see. It's the Ascension of George Washington. Now, there's a bigger photo of it. It took me a long time to do just the drawing, let alone the sculpture, because I had to get all those figures right. And one of the things I learned at the Franklin Mint was how to really copy a photograph. We used to do coins that were taken from famous artwork, famous paintings and things like Goya or whoever, and we had to follow each detail. You had to follow each little detail and get it correct. So I learned how to do that from my Franklin Mint days. This is a clay model. I had at that time they were doing the copy, the text right on the base, and now they just put it on digitally later. But you can see that's what I started out with. And how I do these is, this is the blank here. It's just flat. I lay a flat layer of clay down. Some of the relief at the U.S. Mint at the highest was only about 100 thousandths of an inch. That's like 1/10 of an inch. It's really like a little over a 16th. But I would put a layer of clay down that was approximately half that relief, and then I would put my drawing on top of it, and I would trace it off. And I cut out what I don't need. The negative space was all cut out. So what I had at this point was a layer, one level layer, that I could either cut into or model onto, which, you know, kind of made it go faster. Because I like to work fast. If I work too long, the thing gets stale. See? And here's what you do. So I pretend that's the clay model you just saw. I band it up. I put clay around the edges. You can see I rolled out some clay there. And I put that around the edges so the plaster, when I pour it, doesn't leak. You can see it. So I put it around the edge. And I use a popsicle stick, by the way. And then I pour soap on it, and I'll let it sit, and then I'll soap it up with a sponge, and then pour that off. And then when it dries, I'm ready to cast. So there you can see popsicle sticks again. I used to level it. And I pour the plaster into a bucket with water already in it. If you do it the other way, it doesn't work. And then I use my hand to mix it because I can feel where the lumps are and everything. But the problem is your hand gets so dry and beat up from being in the plaster water. I learned that, you know, I use plastic gloves now. And there it is, plastic gloves, the plaster, which is I just started to mix it. I paint it in so it gets into all the cracks, all the nooks and crannies and all those things. Paint it in so that there's no air bubbles. Give it a good shake too. And then when it dries, approximately 45 minutes later, when it's set up, it gets real hot. You can always tell it's ready to open because the plaster gets real hot. and I put razor blades in. I use a mallet and I crack it open. And that's the finished reverse of the Brumidi Congressional Gold Medal. That's my drawing for the Obverse. And that's the sculpt. They actually sent us down to the Capitol because I don't know if you've ever heard of the Brumidi corridors down there, but there are all these hallways that he painted, and he used the same type of fresco technique that Leonardo used. And again, he also did the rotunda at the top. This one was for the heart doctor, Michael DEBAKEY. And that's the clay model. And that's the finished product. So like, my art is kind of different in a way because it's not the finished product when I'm finished with it. I have to consider how these things are going to look when they're actually produced, and not how they look when I make them. So it takes years to do that, and it's nothing that I consciously tried to do. It just kind of worked into my system somehow through all my years of working and getting old, you know. So this is one of my favorites. I did it for the women's Air Force service pilots, and it shows the 3 planes that they flew and the insignia at the bottom. This one was really a challenge, was trying to get the lettering and the wings and everything to work out so that I wasn't overlapping any letters, and then also to have them have the lettering level from here to here. That's the finished plaster. You can't quite see it, but there's a stipple effect in the background. So all day long I had one of my sculpture tools, and it was, so I think my secretary thought it was a woodpecker in my office or something. And that's the finished metal. That's a reverse. Also on the airplane theme, this was for the Air Force fighter pilots. You see a plane from World War I, a biplane. World War II, I think it's a P-51. I forget what this was, but it was used in the Korean War. And then this plane was in Vietnam. And the 5 stars, you need to get 5 kills before you're a fighter ace. Yeah, Norman BORLAUG. He was a geneticist that figured out how to increase the yield of grain, like wheat, and particularly in African countries. So he, before his ideas were instigated in Africa, they were importing wheat, a lot of wheat. And by the time he got his program in effect, they were exporting it. So if anyone deserves a Congressional Gold Medal, it's this guy. I actually got to meet him down in Washington. This one is the one that I was in the shower, and it came to me, just came to me. It happens very rarely, but occasionally it does. And most of the time I have to slave over it and, you know, work really hard. But this one just kind of came to me one day, and I went in the next day to work, and I did a thumbnail, and then I fleshed it out, and it got picked. It's a reverse for the Byron Nelson Congressional Gold Medal. And this one I'm sure you're familiar with. When I first got to the Mint, Dave, I can't think of his last name, but he was working as the acting director at the time. So he comes into our studio, the artist studio one day, and he has a hat with papers in it. He says, okay, he says, I don't know who to pick for this, so you guys draw straws. You draw these out. And I pulled it out, and lo and behold, I got it. So that one was a very important sculpt to do. I had to go to Washington. I met with the director, Henrietta Foreman, or I forget what her name. Yeah, Henrietta Fore, yeah. And she gave me advice, which some of it I took and some of it I didn't. But this was designed by Joe Fitzgerald. And he had done a design and showed it to John Mercanti, who was my boss at the time. He said, Joe, really come in, right in on it. Come in so it's like just his face in there. So he did that. And it's a different kind of perspective than we usually see on our coinage. That's what the final Byron Nelson looked like. So I had one of the higher ups at the Mint come in one day and say, "Why is the ball behind him?" I was like, how do you explain that to someone that isn't an artist? He didn't say, "How come the ball's so big?" And keeping on the golf theme, this one I did for Jack Nicklaus. And it's an interesting story. We got to the Capitol Rotunda for the ceremony, and being the U.S. Mint, we had front row seats. So I'm walking to my seat, and I look who's sitting next to me, and it's Donald Trump. Next thing I know, I feel a tap on my shoulder, and he's looking at me, and he holds up the program and had this on the cover, and he goes and shakes my hand. Well, I'm not going to get into politics, but I did shake his hand. This was actually the first design I had chosen at the U.S. Mint. And I think it's one of my best. It's one of my favorites. I used to, after I completed the design, I would put it up and look at it every day thinking it's really nice, but it won't get picked. And then it finally did get picked. And strangely enough, one day I went out to lunch and I got that in change. And I said to the vendor, "You know, I sculpted this." He said, "Yeah, sure you did." So I don't do that anymore. If I get that in change, I just ignore it. And that was actually, when I got to the Mint, within 2 weeks, John Mercanti gave me the California State Quarter, which was designed by Al Maletsky to sculpt. Al had left at that point, so I had to sculpt it, and it's all right. That was also my design for Hawaii. And my design for New Mexico. Just kind of blah, but that's what they wanted. They wanted a map on there, so we put it on, gave it to them. This one I did not design. I think Donna Weaver. Yeah, I'm really bad with names anymore. Anyway, she designed it. I love the design, and I got to sculpt that. This was after she left. I worked with Donna for several years, and then she left around 2007, I think. And that was the first of the ATB quarters was my design. And I was really busy at the time, so I had Joe Menace sculpt it for me. And then I also did the Great Sand Dunes. And I actually had been there before with my family, and we crawled up all the dunes and everything. So I put like a father and his son playing in the sand there. It got picked, to my surprise. And this was actually the second of the ATB quarters, was Yellowstone. And then the baseball coin. I designed the reverse and sculpted it, and sculpted the obverse. This was the concave coin. Interesting story. The launch was going to be in Washington, D.C. one day, but there was a government shutdown. And apparently Brooks Robinson and Joe Morgan were going to be there. And when I was a kid, Baltimore Orioles were my team. I idolized Brooks Robinson, best third baseman ever. And I saw Mike Schmidt play. Anyway, they canceled it. So Ken Meifert, who is he's associated with the Hall of Fame, who these were done for in Cooperstown, apparently called Brooks and said, "Hey, Don really wanted to meet you. Why don't you give him a call?" So I'm sitting watching TV one night, the phone rings. "Hello, is this Don Everhart?" "Yeah." "Brooks Robinson here." And I was just about fell out of my chair. And he was just a normal guy. We talked for like 20 minutes talking baseball. He used to play for the York White Roses, and York is my hometown, so we had a lot to chat about that. Interesting guy. Still very spry and very, seemed like he was pretty fit for his age. And then the obverse was designed by Cassie McFarland, and I sculpted that. Before I sculpted it, I thought, I need some better reference on this. So I went home, and I found my son's Little League glove, and it was exactly like the drawing. I mean, she could have used it for reference, as far as I know. So I brought that into work, and then that's how, you can't quite see it now, but there's a texture on the glove. And these little areas here where the glove is kind of crinkled from wear, I added that, and I wouldn't have seen that if I wouldn't have had the glove. That's the gold version. And there I am with Brooks. This is the common reverse for the presidential dollar coin series, which is my design. Used on all of them. And that's the Lincoln design that got chosen. I wound up doing 15 of these obverses. I don't know how many are in the series, but it's like 40% for something like that. I was always good with portraits, particularly male portraits, and I enjoyed doing that. That's the final. I never liked that photo because it just doesn't show his character because of the reflection. Grant, that one came out pretty good, I thought. Woodrow Wilson, I think that was the last one that I did. Harry Truman. When we presented our designs to the CFA for the Kennedy dollar coin, one of the members of the CFA said, American people do not want to see their president looking down. And I think people thought that, well, you did that because he was assassinated. No, I did it because his official portrait, he's like this. And that's what I was trying to evoke, was the feel of that portrait. I forget who did it, but where he was looking down, because I felt that the stress that he was under with the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything else, that was appropriate. And of course Nixon. I made sure I got a profile because you could show his nose then. This one, I did the design and it had 6 feet up there. And I thought, I'm never satisfied. I thought, what can I do to make this better? And I went, crutches. And one of the comments that they wanted to use, one of the captions was, they stood up for us. So I gave the one guy crutches, took a leg away and gave him crutches and put, they stood up for us, and it got chosen. And I actually think, maybe not the best design I ever did, but the best idea executed that I did at the Mint. This one has a story to it. What you see there is my grandson being held by my son-in-law off of a photograph my daughter took, who's a professional photographer, and I sculpted it. So it was a family affair on this one. I was at work and I was trying to come up with an idea, nothing was happening, nothing happened, and then it struck me. My daughter did this great photo of Jack. So I called her up, I said, do you mind if we use it? So she said, no, go ahead. So of course she had to get get it all squared away legally with the Mint, but it eventually happened and it got picked, and I think it was very popular. I don't know how they did with sales on it though. I heard the sales weren't great for that program, but this one has a special meaning for me. He doesn't look like that anymore. Which was actually a problem. I had to change things, like his mouth and his hair and his eyes a little bit, because we can't have a living person on a coin. And I said, well, he doesn't even look like that anymore. It doesn't matter. So whatever, I did it. I changed it. But it still looks like him. And this one I did not design, but I like to do rugged-faced individuals, and they don't come much more rugged than Mark Twain. So even though I was a good speller, I wasn't that good. Mark Twain. This one is the obverse of the National Parks, actually gold $5 piece. And you have John Muir, and of course Teddy, and Yosemite in the background. And if you'll notice, they kind of blend into the park itself, into the background. So I followed that through in the reverse and put the insignia hanging on a log, and it kind of superimposed over the same background. So I like that integration of the art and the actual subject matter. This was a design by Chris Costello, and it really pops, I think. I like to do architectural things in addition to portraits and animals, and I had fun doing this one. When I was freelancing, I did a series of World War II aircraft for Unicover in Wyoming, and it was really cool because I learned a lot about planes in World War II, and I just enjoyed doing these planes. And I don't think I have any on the program here tonight, but they had to be specific pilots, specific planes, specific missions, and all their serial numbers had to be the same. And I would put like background of like bombing a dam or something like that for I think it was the Lancaster that did that. But I don't have any of those to show you. The code talkers, originally the Navajo were the only ones to get a congressional gold medal. Well, then they decided we need to give all the tribes, because all the tribes contributed in the code talkers. So this one, I think, is very simple, but it really says what I wanted it to say. And, I like it, even though I like it because it's so simple. Yeah, Raoul Wallenberg saved many Jews in Germany during World War II. Hungary, you're right, I'm sorry. I had another design, I can't show it, but I had strips of barbed wire behind it. And he was actually kidnapped by the Soviets. So the idea was, which side of the barbed wire is he on? Is he freeing people, or is he himself imprisoned? But they didn't pick it. So, whatever. That's the finished piece. The Dalai Lama. We actually got to meet him in his hotel room before he gave his speech for the accepting the gold medal. And we're all sitting around in a circle. He's to my left, and each one of us taking turn addressing him. And you always say, "Your Holiness," when you address the Dalai Lama. So it got to me, and I said, "Your Holiness, I was very impressed by the feeling of serenity in your photographs." And he leaned in and he looked at me real close. I thought, here comes the answer to life. Here comes the whole thing. And he said, "Did you give me hair?" So I assured him that I did, and then we spent the next 5 minutes talking about male pattern baldness. You can't make this stuff up. So I actually used Jim Lickerit's hands. He was one of the sculptors at the time. He modeled for me, and I used his hands for this, so it's not really the Dalai Lama's hand. It doesn't matter. And that's the medal. I didn't like the medal that the Mint photographed. I didn't like the photograph of the medal that the Mint used, so I did my own, which really isn't a lot better, but it's better than what they had. And that's me. He gave all of us a prayer shawl. So while he's giving me mine, I'm standing there very reverent, and I said, "Thank you, Your Highness." And he looked at me, he paused, and I said, "Did I say that? Did I actually say Highness instead of Holiness?" And he paused, but then he put it on. He figured that I was just, stupid and didn't know any better or something. But I seemed to get away with it. That's Ed Moy in the background. This was the first congressional gold medal design I had chosen for Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. I actually talked to her on the phone when we were discussing what she wanted on her medal. It was right before she died. This is the Pope. I worked with Tom Urim on this. This was actually given to him in Washington in 15 or 16. 2000. Yeah. So that's a 3-inch medal. I like the way it came out. And then the reverse. This one took me a long time because there's 3 domes. There's St. Mark's. There's the National Shrine in Washington, and the Capitol. And as I was explaining to some people earlier, this took me a long time because with architecture, you can't fake it, you can't do it freehand. It had to be done with T-squares and triangles and everything else like that. It took a long time to draw, let alone to sculpt. But I thought it came out well, and Tom had it enameled, which I didn't think I was going to like, but I actually love it. I think the black really sets it off nice. So I don't think female portraits are my forte, but this one actually turned out pretty well. Suu Kyi. Things have changed since I did this, and it's not Burma, it's, what is it now? Myanmar, yeah. And she wanted a peacock on the reverse, so I gave her one. The only thing I had to change is I had a different column. I had I think an ionic column in there or something, and they said that's not appropriate, so I changed it, but otherwise it went through pretty much unchanged. And that was at the ceremony with her and some other celebrities. This one I thought turned out real well. I remember it was a rush job. I had to do it in one weekend, do the design. And it came down to me and one other artist that they liked, but they actually picked my Shimon Peres. And I got to do the presidential medal. They give a medal to each president after each administration. And this is the one for W. And I actually got invited to the White House, to the Oval Office, and presented it to him. And I got to tell you, the guy is a lot of fun to hang around with. I mean, he really is the guy you can have a beer with. I mean, he's joking around. Ed Moy came walking. He was with me at the time, and he walked in. And the first thing that Bush did was he goes down, he reaches down, he pulls up Ed's pant leg and looks up at him and smiles. And when we left, I said, Ed, why did he do that? He said, oh, he's always making fun of the way I dress. He's a pretty natty dresser. But he had these socks on that looked like clown socks, you know, it's pretty weird. And that was him. And then I also got to do the Obama Presidential Medal. This was his second term obverse. I consider it one of my best portraits. I really do. I think it came out well. And I did both reverses, were both my designs. And I think Rick Masters designed the first term obverse. And that's me with him. Looking older than I did with Bush. This is an old medal. This is probably the oldest thing I have up here. It's a medal I did for Society of Medalists back in the 80s. I think it was 82 or something. I put it in the National Sculpture Society show in New York, and it took first prize. I'm always interested in sea life and fish. I keep fish at home, and you know, aquatic things really interest me. This was for BROOKGREEN Gardens. The idea is it has to be the history of or the flora and fauna of South Carolina. So naturally, since I like creepy crawly things, reptiles and stuff like that, I gave them a hermit crab, and the back of it has BROOKGREEN Gardens, South Carolina, which was inspired by lettering on psychedelic posters, because I am a child of the 60s. That was just, I did for myself. It's a freestanding medal. I used to have lizards when I was a kid. Not this type of chameleon, but I did have lizards. So that was inspired by that. And you can see the fly there he's eyeing up. And Crocodile Rock. It's spelled right.
Did you patinate it to be green so it matched the color of the...
I just liked the color. But this, interestingly, was inspired by a photograph my parents took on their honeymoon. Not those photographs, but they went to an alligator farm. And they had these pictures of these, they're crawling all over each other, and I thought, that's cool. So I did that, Crocodile Rock. And of course, many of you know I'm a cyclist, so I did this design, sprint finish. And that's the plaster model. And then there's the bronze. It's a one-sided medal. And then there's the dinosaurs. In 1993, I was on a plane on the way to London for a medal show, and I was reading Jurassic Park. This is way before the movie came out. I think it was before 93. And I had this idea to put the animal in its contemporary setting with contemporary animals, Triceratops, Pteranodons. I think Meganora was before him, but I put it in anyway. It looked cool. And then you turn it over and you have the fossil remains. So there are 3 dimensions to a medal. You have the obverse, reverse, and the time it takes to turn it over. In this case, 65 million years. So they liked it so much at the Society of Medalists, they said, we want 5 more. So Deinonychus was a pack hunter, raptor, about the size of the what they called velociraptors in Jurassic Park, which are actually more like Deinonychus. Velociraptor was the size of a turkey. But they liked the name. Diplodocus or Diplodocus, whatever. Sauropod, Jurassic, Pteranodon. I like the reverse of this one the best of all of them, because you don't find fossils that are as complete as these are, but I just wanted to show as much as I could, but on this one, I decided I was going to go more for realism and just show part of it. Most of the time when they find fossils, it's just a jumble of bones. And I don't know how they put them together and make them into animal or make them into skeletons, but they know what they're doing. Stego, Jurassic with Allosaurus. And there's a beetle or something there. This is really complete. Would not be that complete. Styracosaurus. And this Obverse has all these other animals here, opossum, lizard, turtle. They're still alive today. And this one you're probably familiar with. Tom had commissioned me to do this last summer. I worked on this design for Rachel Carson, someone who I think is particularly appropriate for these times. I mean, she was way ahead of her time in trying to have DDT outlawed because eagles were dying. It's our national symbol, and it was dying. You hardly saw any of them. But she was a very heroic person. She had stage 4 cancer, and she testified before Congress in Washington while she was dying to have DDT outlawed. I mean, a real hero, and doesn't get enough press. I remember reading Silent Spring when I was in high school, I think it was. And since the eagle came back, it picked out a trout from the stream. This was the World War I silver medal. It was designed by Leroy Transfield. I think he's from New Zealand, and I sculpted it. The first sculpt I did of this, I didn't like, Washington didn't like it. They called me up one day and they said, you know, it's really a nice sculpt, but you know, it doesn't really capture the feeling of the sketch that he did. I said, tell you what, I'm going to do it over. So what I did was I got really soft clay, and I was just very expressive with it. Instead of finishing it off like I usually do, I just let it go and just let things happen. And it came out really nice. They loved it. So I redeemed myself. And that's the reverse. This is one I put in. It's done for Provident Mint in Florida, an Aztec dragon. That was cool. It was fun doing that one. And that's it.